Hi everyone. So today I will talk about the Shahnameh. It is the Persian Book of Kings. Originally it's written by Ferdowsi. This edition that you can see is translated by Dick Davis, and this book took me so long to read, and I'm so glad that it took me a long time to read. It is absolutely amazing. Of course it's amazing. It covers the entire history of Persia told through the lives of the kings, and it follows the kings' lineage, how they came to power, how they acted when they were in power, and how they inevitably lost their power. The different kings, when they're in power, they have slightly different goals, but a lot of the time that this book covers is spent in warfare and battles. And it seems like the kings are constantly at war with someone, or sending a letter to either start a war or to demand something, and that causes a conflict. And many times the king, if he does not take the advice of the woman in his life, whether that's his mom or his wife or mistress or concubine, bad things happen when he does not follow their advice. And more often than not, the king does not follow their advice. This book, it took Dick Davies 7 years to translate it. He took the full Shahnameh and he condensed it into about 1,000 pages. He was I feel like he's very systematic about what he chose to include for this one Penguin edition. He roughly gave every king roughly equal treatment. He took out some passages or some stories that could emphasize racism and possibly show the Persian people in a bad light. I think this is probably a good choice for him to do, because this is an introductory level for people who are new to Persian literature. So if you are new to reading Persian literature and you see Persian people in a modern day unflattering light, it could build like an aversion towards wanting to read more about it. But if you read this book or another introductory one and you have like a warm feeling towards Persian people, that could encourage you to read more and more about it. And then of course you have a lot of time to learn about some possible historical racism towards other groups or tensions that existed with other groups, because that you can always learn. And if you learn it first, it may not be very good, but if you learn it after you give the culture a little bit of a chance, at least you can have a bit more of an open mind for possibly why some of those tensions existed in the past. And then of course there's plenty of time to learn what tensions could exist today, and if they happen because of something that happened in the past. Dick Davis, when he translated this, he mentions that some parts of this book are difficult to understand, because it's hard to know what's going on. My point of view, I think there's just too many people involved. If you're condensing the entire history of a culture into just 1,000 pages, there's going to be a lot of name dropping. He mentions the reason is this epic contradicts with the history of the time and also with itself. So this book, if you look at the history of Persia from some historical documents, compare it to this epic and what this epic says happened, there's some contradictions. With the epic itself, it contradicts itself as well. Sometimes even within the same chapter, there's a contradiction. So if you do read this, I recommend to not get too caught up on all the names and how they relate to each other, because for a first reading, there's just simply too many. just try to enjoy it just for the sake of the story and to develop an understanding for the Persian culture, Persian history, and just getting to know the way that they structure their stories and the flow of time, I think, is a very powerful aspect of this book because it does cover such a long span of time. So I think that's a huge benefit for reading this. And for some reason, this one is very different from the Mahabharata, because in the Mahabharata, for some reason, the battle scenes were very grinding and boring to read, and the battle scenes was actually only one major section in the middle of the Mahabharata, whereas the battle scenes in the Shahnameh are sprinkled throughout the entire text. And I found the battle scenes in the Shahnameh were not grinding to read for some reason. Sometimes the battle scenes were very exciting to read. Like it's like an epic battle scene and everybody's on the field and they're fighting with each other or something. But it had that epic feel to it that it didn't glorify the violence, but it was told in a way where I think honor, or it's called far, possibly, if that's how to pronounce it, I'm not sure. But maybe that element is what makes it exciting. It's a kingly, dignified quality that a rightful, honorable king would have. So if a king is leading his military with that kingly quality, that could make the battle feel epic and exciting, as opposed to grinding and painful or boring to read, for lack of a better word. So I thought that was a very interesting contrast from the Mahabharata. And it is a very long, very, very long. So this absolutely is not a book for everyone because it is quite long. And there is a lot of battles and a lot of names. And it goes through a long history of Persia. But if this interests you, I think it would be awesome to read. Otherwise, a much shorter book to possibly dip your toes in would be The Conference of the Birds. I really recommend that as a beginner book for Persian literature because it's a lot more lighthearted and not quite as dense. This one is dense like concrete in terms of how much history is covered. So that's all. So thanks very much for listening and have a good day. Bye everyone.